Sunday Surefire Podcast. I'm your host, the commish. Joining me today is the co-host, Ethan Weaver. Ethan, what's up?
Mish, how we doing?
Doing pretty well, my man. Doing pretty well. We have a fun-filled episode for you folks today. We'll dive right into the meat of the subject here in a moment, but we did want to start out with a little bit of breaking news around the NFL that's gone down. We're going to start with the DeAndre Hopkins signing. Finally picks a team here in the middle of July, ends up in Nashville with the Tennessee Titans. So, Ethan, just off the top, just give me your quick thoughts on that signing.
To me, that just tells me that Hopkins was looking for the money rather than looking to get a Super Bowl ring. Tennessee is kind of a gross landing spot when you just look at their offense. I mean, they were 30th in attempts last year with only 456, only beating out Atlanta and the Bears. He's clearly going to be the top target, which so in fantasy he may still return some value because he should be a target hog there. Obviously, it impacts Treylon Burks a little bit. I don't think Treylon Burks is going to beat out Hopkins as the alpha in that offense. So it hurts him a little bit, but I do think at the end of the day, Hopkins is going to get his targets. So he still should be a relatively productive player in fantasy for us. It's just Tennessee is just not a place where you want to see these guys land, just because their offense has been predominantly run heavy and hasn't thrown the ball, as I mentioned earlier.
Yeah, I wasn't enamored with it either. I think we kind of came to the realization it was going to be either the Patriots or the Titans in recent weeks. And I'll tell you, even as a Patriots fan, if for a Hopkins as a fantasy asset, I wasn't overly high on either of those situations, just based on what I think of their ability to throw the ball at a high level. I think the Titans are probably slightly worse, just because of their pedigree of running the ball. You mentioned their attempts stat; they're sixth from the bottom in pass rate as well. So just they really do have a kind of an old school philosophy when it comes to moving the ball. Maybe with this signing, maybe they have learned that we can't get away with just running the ball the way we want to. I know they had that one nice run to the AFC Championship game a few years ago behind Derrick Henry, but it's really hard to win that way in the modern NFL. So maybe they are going to have a little bit of an uptick in passing volume. The only player I really like this for is Ryan Tannehill. If you're still holding out hope, maybe you have him in a superflex league, then he can return some value for you, give you some mid-range QB2 numbers if they do decide to throw the ball a little bit more with at least a star player like DeAndre Hopkins on that roster, kind of sliding Treylon Burks and Chigo Okonkwo into more supporting roles, which might actually accentuate some of their skill sets and what they do well. So those are our quick thoughts on Hopkins. And then the only other real news that we had come down the pike recently was we just had the franchise tag deadline, the deadline to sign players to long-term deals come and go on Monday of this week. And we had Tony Pollard to sign his franchise tag, so he'll be in camp ready to go for Dallas this season. We had some other high, I guess you could say high profile players in Saquon Barkley and Josh Jacobs, certainly, that did not sign their franchise tag, and they are not expected to be at training camp when it begins next week. So just kind of give me your thoughts on those two and kind of maybe the state of the running back position as a whole.
Yeah, I just think it further cements the fact that the NFL, the teams, the GM, the coaching staff just doesn't value the running back position. Josh Jacobs had a career year last year. Saquon Barkley was a number 3 overall pick in the draft, and these guys just can't get what they want on the open market or even trying to negotiate with their current teams. So it's tough to be a running back in this current state. It's just a position that is very replaceable, and NFL teams are smartening up to that fact, and they'd rather spend money elsewhere. I mean, as good as Josh Jacobs and Saquon Barkley can be, there's guys that can do somewhat similar things, and the league is just going into a more pass-heavy offense, anyways. But it's just sad for those guys because they are great football players. They're just not getting the respect that they deserve, unfortunately. But we'll see what happens with Josh Jacobs and Barkley. I wouldn't be surprised if they hold out. I don't think they should pull Le'Veon Bell and sit out the year. I know Le'Veon Bell mentioned that was the worst mistake of his career, but I mean, if you're Josh Jacobs, you're Saquon Barkley, and you're playing without a long term deal, and you tear your knee at their age, it's probably over for them, if they in terms of ever signing a big deal that they think they deserve. So it's just a tough position to play in the NFL right now.
Yeah, they really are in a difficult spot. And I did think that if there were some free agent running backs that were going to get paid at least a decent chunk of change this offseason with at least, 2 or maybe even 3 years of security, it would have been one of those guys. Just given the fact that they touch the ball so much and their teams really do utilize them so much on the offensive side. I mean, both of these players were top 3 in touches last season. And like I said, the offenses go through those guys, and for them to not even really get really that close to signing long-term extensions was just tells you that the league doesn't value running back. Us as Patriots fans, we've watched our team operate under this philosophy for decades at this point. Really, just when a player's contract comes up, if they can't get him on a team-friendly contract, the pass just would move along. So this is nothing new to us, but I think it might be new to some other fans, and it does make the fantasy front a lot harder, where the running back position is not that important to NFL teams' wins and losses. It's very important to us as fantasy and as dynasty managers, redraft managers, best ball, whatever the case may be. So that's why it's really important to stay on top of this stuff and kind of just be one step ahead and make sure you're paying attention to Sunday Surefire as so we can give you our thoughts on all the breaking news as it happens. And just kind of the last stat I have here on the running back discussion is, of the last 9 Super Bowl champions, only one of them had a 1,000-yard rusher. That was LeGarrette Blount in 2016. During that season, he made $1.5 million in earnings. So just kind of tells you that if you're looking for a championship, caliber difference-making players on your roster, running back has not been a place where NFL teams have spent premium assets, whether it be draft capital or high free agent dollars to get these players on their team. So that's what we have for news between Hopkins and the running back situation. Last week we touched on players that we felt were quality buy and sell candidates in dynasty formats. Today we're going to be focusing more on 2023 season, just in identifying players that we think have an opportunity to outperform their current draft costs. These are the guys that we're all looking for to go on our championship runs this year. We all want the guy who was drafted as WR2 that ends up being a WR1, or maybe the player going as an RB3 that makes that jump up into the top 24, a guy we can put into our lineup and compete with every single week. And for this exercise, we'll be using Fantasy Pros half point PPR ECR, which stands for Expert Consensus Rankings, as well as the Fantasy Pros ADP or average draft position to tell you where these guys are currently ranked. Just keep in mind that we're still very early in the redraft season. So these rankings and these ADPs, ECRs are going to change as we advance through the remainder of the offseason. But this is a good kind of first look if you're maybe a manager who is not following along every single week, but now with training camp in the air, there's a little bit more buzz for the upcoming season that maybe this is the time that you're checking in and you want to see what's going on with the league. So we'll jump right into it. We'll start with the quarterback position. Ethan, tell me who your quarterback that you think can outperform their current cost is at the moment.
I went with Brock Purdy, and I think his ECR is obviously going to increase if he is named the starter. His ECR right now is QB 26, and I just think that's a steal. If he's the starter, I think he's going to give you weekly QB1 upside. When he started playing weeks 13 through 18, his QB finishes were 18, 8, 14, 13, 9, and 5, which averages to be QB 11. With the Niners' weapons, we talk about Ayuk all the time, Deebo Samuel, Christian McCaffrey, George Kittle. He just needs to get the ball in his playmakers' hands, and he's playing one of the best offensive schemes, that's Shanahan's scheme in the NFL right now, and he just needs to put the ball in his playmakers' hands and watch them do the rest. And what Brock Purdy did last year was exactly what the Niners need. PFF graded him out as the overall QB 13, and he was also 13th in PFF passing grade as well with a 75.1. So he clearly was efficient throwing the football last year. He was great for the Niners. He completed 67% of his passes last year for 1,640 yards and a 16-3 touchdown to interception ratio. So those numbers in from weeks 13 to 18 were good enough to give you weekly QB1 upside. And I just think ECR 26, that this is clearly the community not knowing whether he's going to be ready with his elbow or potentially being named the starter. According to Tom Pelissero of NFL Network, he reported that Purdy still remains to be on track for week 1. So obviously we'll keep an eye on that. But I think if Brock Purdy is named the starter and he is good to go week 1, I don't see how he's not flirting with QB1 numbers every single week.
Purdy's a guy that I talked to him a few weeks ago when I was going over some undervalued PFF performers at the quarterback position. He finished great. I was a 77.7 on their scale, good for QB 13 overall in the season. So he's a guy I've liked for a while now. He's someone I was fortunate enough to grab a share of in Dynasty while he was on the waiver wire. Just really good value there. And like, yeah, those 7th round picks, they typically don't pan out amount to anything at all. So what he's already done is pretty incredible. And it, for him to be able to beat out, looks like he's probably going to beat out one of your favorites in Trey Lance, who the team invested 3 first-round picks in. It's kind of crazy. It's almost like the script writers wanted to throw a twist at us that week. So that was tough. What are your thoughts on that? How you feeling with doing with the we get to watch your boy Trey Lance holding the clipboard behind Mr. Irrelevant?
Yeah, I've been a very big Trey Lance supporter. My biggest regret is probably taking him over Jamar Chase in one of my rookie drafts. Thankfully, I got Jamar Chase in another one, but he just I just with his just skill set, with his obviously rushing ability, giving that Konami code QB, he just had all the upside in the world in one of the best offensive systems in the league, and it's just insane that he may go down as one of the bigger busts in NFL draft history, just based on guaranteed starts by a top 3 NFL draft pick at the quarterback position. Historically speaking, most of these top 3 quarterbacks get 25 to 30 starts at the minimum, and he's got only a handful. I don't know off the top of my head, but obviously he sat his entire rookie year, and then with a couple spot starts with Garoppolo injuries, and then he started week 1 and then broke his ankle week 2. So not a lot. And at this point in the game, if Purdy's named the starter, he's probably done in San Francisco. Hopefully, he gets a shot elsewhere, but we'll see what happens.
Yeah, it's tough. It's tough when you're really big on a guy, you make big investments in him, and they don't pan out. Unfortunately, that's part of the game when it comes to fantasy football. It definitely hurts you more in dynasty than it does in redraft. And I'm gonna move now to a player that is a team also spent high draft capital on at the quarterback position, and that's Anthony Richardson, ECR QB 18 at the moment, and his ADP is 114 off the board. If you play Dynasty, you're probably not shocked to hear Richardson's name being brought up in this type of discussion. In that format, he's going no later than the number 2 overall in Superflex rookie drafts. Maybe even number 1 overall in Superflex if you're depending on your team needs. If you're okay at running back and you want to pass on Bijan, you just need a stable quarterback or quarterback with upside. This is your play. There are some long-term question marks, of course, with Richardson. He didn't play a ton of games at Florida at the college level, so we don't know for sure, obviously, with any of these players that they're going to pan out. But he does have top 5 draft capital behind him, so he should get a long runway to be successful as the Colts quarterback over the next handful of seasons. You mentioned that most quarterbacks get a nice long leash to start their career, something that Trey Lance was not afforded. Other than Trey Lance, NFL players selected quarterbacks specifically since 2009, drafted in the top 5 picks. All of them started at least 10 games in their rookie season, with the exception of Jared Goff, who started the final 7 games of his rookie campaign, and of course Trey Lance in that situation that we mentioned. So almost all of these guys get that opportunity in multiple years worth of opportunity, I should add, to prove that they have it, to prove that the organization made a good decision and selected them as high as that they did. But one of the biggest assets that Richardson has on his side here that's great for fantasy is the mobility he's likely going to offer. It's just a big part of his game, and that's music to ears for us fantasy managers. It just can't be understated how important those yards on the ground are. The case in point here for this is Justin Fields' season from last year. The guy finished just QB5 in he finished QB5 in points per game, just a massive performance. And he did all that with just 2,200 passing yards and only 17 passing touchdowns. But his 1,100 rushing yards and 8 scores on the ground are really what carried his fantasy value. And if you don't think 1,000+ rushing yards are on the table, or at least in the realm of possibilities for Anthony Richardson, well, you need to go pop in the tape and watch what this guy did on Saturdays last season. He's a physical force of nature that we've really never seen before at the quarterback position. The guy crushed the NFL Combine, put on a show there. And whether he realizes that full potential or not is up in the air. But I love his landing spot. That's before we even get into the where he landed specifically with the Colts. They have a new head coach as well, starting over with that regime under Shane Steichen, who comes over from the Philadelphia Eagles. I don't know if you follow the NFL closely, but the Eagles were in the Super Bowl last year behind Jalen Hurts. He was a fantasy superstar last year, and really that started in his first full year as a full-time starter in 2021, where he finished QB9 overall. And it just kind of goes to show that in a Steichen system, like once you get the opportunity, you really can pop pretty quickly for fantasy purposes. He's also going to have support from day one with PFF's top 10 ranked offensive line entering 2023. The Colts are number 10 on that list, as well as Jonathan Taylor pounding the rock behind them. And I mentioned that he was really expensive in Dynasty, but in redraft, that's definitely not the case. This is a really low price point. It's actually incredibly low for someone with as high of a ceiling with that Konami code upside that we're looking for. So if you punt on your quarterback position, you can easily grab Richardson for your upside, and you can pair him up with a safer option. A guy like Jared Goff, maybe Aaron Rodgers, if you're into him, players that are going in the mid rounds, maybe you want to take a little bit more risk on, you take Tua a little bit later. So someone to kind of hold the fort down for you if you don't want to trust Richardson right out of the gate. This is round 10 ADP here. So in this range here, there's nothing but upside. If that pick misses, like it's not a big deal. You can easily move on. And then you can even stream quarterback if he's a bust completely as a rookie. Managers have been getting away with that for decades in fantasy in redraft formats. So just keep in mind that there really isn't a ton of risk at him at this particular price point. But what are your thoughts on Richardson and his current costs?
I agree completely with your points there. If Anthony Richardson is named the starter week one, I think he has a very safe and high floor. If he's out there, he's gonna be rushing the football. As you stated, Justin Fields barely threw the ball last year. The Bears were last in pass attempts, and he was a QB1. And Anthony Richardson has a decent supporting cast. I would say he's in a better position than Justin Fields was last year, and he's just, I think, a very very safe option at quarterback just because of it, yeah, because of his legs, and he's getting the same kind of hype. Honestly, probably more hype than Trey Lance did, but I feel the same way about Anthony Richardson as I did about Trey Lance when he was coming up through the draft process, and obviously getting the top draft capital. These guys that are just physical, just specimens. As you stated, Anthony Richardson was the most athletic quarterback to ever go through the draft process, and Trey Lance was another one of those guys that was an athletic freak. And people just get excited. They get excited for the upside that they bring to the table, and they expect big things. So, Trey Lance, when he was a rookie, he was flirting with second round overall, um, a second round startup pick, and you see Anthony Richardson in the second round right now, sometimes going in the first round of startup drafts. So Anthony Richardson, I'm definitely think his ECR is going to increase as we get closer and closer to the season, and I just think it's a pretty safe pick considering he's going to get the opportunity to start games this year, and if he's out there starting, he's going to be using his legs and he's going to be scoring the fantasy points.
Agreed on all that. And the last point I want to make on Richardson is just want to again just go over the price here. Like you're not paying a lot to get this guy. We're using one quarterback data here to get these rankings and these positions. So like you get this, what you need in one QB, or what you should be shooting for is high level upside. And because you can find a safe floor in one QB, particularly in redraft where you can stream the position, but like it's almost best case scenario for him if Gardner Minshew gets named the starter right out of the gate in the first couple weeks. And because I don't think the Colts are going to be a world beater of a team by any stretch. He has some support on offense, but it's only going to be a matter of time before they get this guy on the field. So if that's the case, if Gardner's named the starter entering week one, like Richardson's ADP it's going to drop even further. Like might even be a guy that you can stash, you can grab with one of your last picks in your draft, and you can just kind of be patient with it and play that waiting game. And just kind of roll with or stream the position or roll with a veteran for a little bit for a month or so to get it going, because we don't win fantasy championships in September. We win them at the end of the season. So as good as it is to be rolling from all systems go from week one, keep in mind that you're playing for down the road too. So if you can stash this guy at even later ADP when he gets that opportunity later in the season, it's just going to be all good things, I believe, on that front. But those are our thoughts on Richardson. We're both really high on him as a player, so we'll see how he pans out. Let's go to the wide receiver position now. We've talked about a number of, I feel like, a number of receivers lately that could outperform their ADP, but I know we wanted to make an effort to give you the listeners some different names here. So we're going to leave the Brandon Ayuk, Deontay Johnson, and Jerry Jeudy talk for the side. Just know we still love those guys. But talk to me about someone else at the wide receiver position that you think has could be a good level jumper for us this season.
Yeah, outside the players you just mentioned, I think Christian Watson with an ECR of 24th overall out of receivers um, fits the bill of a player that can make that leap. At 6'4", 208 pounds, he runs a 4.3640, and he has a 97th percentile catch radius. So he's just another one of these physical freaks, and he is all geared up to be the alpha on his team. I know Romeo Dobbs is getting some hype in OTAs, and obviously they just took Jaden Reed in the second round of this NFL draft. But I think Christian Watson has the opportunity to be the target hog in Green Bay, and just has the physical profile to be a perennial wide receiver one in this league. He only had 66 targets last year. Obviously, came on slow. He played at NDSU, which is a smaller school, and so you knew it was going to take him some time. But in those 66 targets, he had 611 yards and 7 touchdowns, and he had that few game stretch where he was just scoring touchdowns. It seemed like every time he was targeted,
Yeah, it was
which
awesome. So much fun.
yeah, I mean, he definitely won some people their weekly matchups during that stretch. But his is I mean, because he scored so many touchdowns in a short period of time, and obviously not having the um, a ton of receptions or targets because he didn't play a full snap share the entire season. His fantasy points per route run was number 3. His QB rating per target was number 2. And his fantasy points per target was number 1, which makes sense because he's just scoring touchdowns at such a high rate. And all those ratings were from Player Profiler. But the guy just has the ability to score at any point on the field, and he's going to be exciting to watch this year. He's a player I'm very excited for, and I think he has that upside. I hope he doesn't turn a great rookie year in terms of touchdowns into a Chase Claypool career arc, because that would disappoint a lot of folks. But I just think Christian Watson, of the receivers in his range, has the clear opportunity at a high target share and to be the alpha in his offense, and just has the physical profile to take advantage of that.
Yeah, I love everything you said about Christian Watson until you got to the point where you compared him to Chase Claypool. So that as someone who as
Yeah,
someone
that's
who's
worst
really high on
case.
as someone who's really high on Christian Watson, who actually went and grabbed him a little bit ahead of his ADP in his dynasty startup a few weeks ago, around the round 3-4 turn in a superflex league. I'm optimistic that he can make that jump and be that perennial top 12, top 15 wide receiver that you referenced, and hopefully his career arc looks nothing like Chase Claypool's to date anyway. But moving on to my player, I'm going to talk about a guy who's had a really strong player arc throughout the duration of his career to this point, and that's Mike Evans, who is currently ECR WR 32, ADP 71 at the moment. He's certainly, like I said, no stranger to the fantasy stage, but what's new about him this time around is the cost to acquire him. He's one of those guys who's been in that WR1 or high end WR2 range for most of his time in the league. But given the departure of Tom Brady and the quarterback competition between Baker Mayfield and Kyle Trask, industry is just a lot lower on Evans than they ever were in years past. The Bucs were number 1 in pass attempts in 2022, so regression is definitely coming for on that front. I'm not going to argue that at all. But the targets aren't going to plummet. I don't believe completely like people think they are. I don't think this team's going to be in the bottom third of the league in targets this season or pass attempts this season. And the way I believe that, because if you just look at the way they've chosen to construct their roster this season, their running back room is headlined by Rachaad White, who you and I both really liked. We liked him a lot coming out of Arizona State last year, and he was someone that we weren't surprised was good down the stretch last year. But is he really the guy to take on 275 plus carries? I don't think that he is. that would more than double his carry total from last year, and we know he's going to be involved on third down. So he's not a 300 touch guy by any means. I'm just not willing to make that bet that he is. And they didn't take a running back in the draft. They did bring in Sean Tucker, who was a high profile name, but he's a UDFA. Like those guys typically don't even make a roster, let alone make noise as rookies. So they'll keep their fingers crossed on him. But their only free agent signing was Chase Edmonds, who's exceeded 100 or carries or more just one time in his career. Beyond that, we're talking about fringe roster players like Patrick Laird and someone you were right about from a few years ago, and Keyshawn Vaughn, who's just a bum, doesn't belong in the NFL. So couple their current running back room with like their offensive line ranking, like they're 14th in the league heading into PFF heading into 2023. So it's an average unit. They're gonna try to run the ball when they can, but they just don't have the bodies in there to sustain a massive running back stretch. And they're probably not going to get a ton of rushes on a Baker or Trask either. So the strength of this Buccaneers offense is still their wide receiver room behind Mike Evans, Chris Godwin, and Russell Gage. As much as the dynasty community wants to bury Mike Evans because of his age, now that he's age 30, he's currently actually in contract extensions with the team. Like there's talk on both sides. They want him to stick around in Tampa, meaning that they have plans for him to be part of their at least their short-term future for the next couple of seasons. So with Evans, you're getting a guy who's never failed to return a 1,000-yard season in fantasy. But now what you get here is the opportunity to buy in on him as your third or fourth wide receiver on the round 7 borderline in a redraft league. And that's the range where you can afford to take shots on players, knowing that they all won't work out. Like we're talking like round 6 to like 10 or so. It starts getting murky really fast in redraft. So it's kind of like, if you hit on 3 guys between 6 and 10, like you're kind of be pretty happy with that. So you have the opportunity here with Evans to get a proven producer, someone who had 1,000 yards last season. And if this really is the year that the bottom falls out completely on Evans, it's not going to ruin your season based on the cost that you're using to acquire him in this range. So give me your thoughts on Evans.
I agree completely. I mean, death, taxes, and Mike Evans getting 1,000 yards is what's guaranteed in life. I
Yeah,
mean, he's
I
going
should
to
have
his
just said
10th.
that. I should have just said that. It would have made my segment a lot shorter.
Exactly. It was. I mean, he's going to his 10th season. He's never had under 1,000 yards, and it's like they have Chris Godwin. Obviously, I'm very high on Chris Godwin this year, but outside Chris Godwin and Mike Evans, I mean, the third target leader might be Rashad White. I mean, Russell Gage is a nice little player, but nothing crazy special. Then you have a second year tight end, Cade Otton. So Mike Evans and Chris Godwin I think are gonna get theirs. Mike Evans in 15 games at 127 targets. So it's not like Mike Evans got 1,000 yards on 166 targets here. So I think we're a little too low on Mike Evans. The Bucks aren't going to be a great football team. They're going to be throwing the ball. We'll see. We'll see how Baker Mayfield can rebound and hopefully show us a little more than he has the last couple of years. But Mike Evans is, in my opinion, a very safe WR 3. If he is your WR3 on your team, based on where he's going, and definitely has a safe floor. He may not have the upside he once had, but definitely a safe wide receiver 2-3 on your team.
Yeah, and as a WR32, like I think that the Warriors are kind of baked into his price, and like Rashad White caught 50 passes last season, so he's definitely going to be involved on the passing front. Chris Godwin actually goes ahead of Mike Evans in redraft circles, and if we're being honest, now Evans is a perimeter guy who catches the ball down the field. Godwin kind of does more work in the short intermediate areas of the field. So like I mean those receptions from Rashad White have more of a chance of affecting a guy like a Chris Godwin, in my estimation, they do someone like a Mike Evans. And Kyle Trask is in year 3 of the system. Baker Mayfield is on his 4th team in 4 years. So they need to figure out what they have in this QB room. And so I don't think the way to do that is just hand the ball off. This really does feel like an experimental year for the Buccaneers all around. And I just get the sense that like they're going to throw the ball more than people want to believe that they are. So at this reduced rate, just based on the age, I'm willing to take that gamble at Evans. If, like I said, if it doesn't work out, it won't kill you. But let's move to the running back position here. There's obviously a lot of uncertainty in the league. The way we let up the show, talking about running backs not signing contracts and all that. But talk to me about a guy that you're high on in 2023, someone you think can outperform their current draft position.
I'm very high on David Montgomery this year with an ECR of RB25. I just think at ECR 25, it's just insane value. He's replacing Jamal Williams in the Lions offense, who was RB13 last year. And in my opinion, David Montgomery is a much better running back than Jamal Williams. Last year, David Montgomery had a juke rate of 34.5%, which was number 9, and was number 8 in evaded tackles with 81. And this has to do with not the greatest offensive line in Chicago. And now he's going from Chicago to the Lions, to Detroit, who have a very good run blocking offensive line, and just had a guy in Jamal Williams who turned that into RB13 performance. And if you look at Jamal Williams' efficiency, we're talking about his yards per touch was number 50. He had it was 14.2% juke rate, which was number 52. Evaded tackles only 39, 38 in running backs. So Jamal Williams just isn't as efficient of a runner as David Montgomery, isn't as good of a runner as David Montgomery, but obviously hit pay dirt a ton, which is why he had the RB13 season. And I just think David Montgomery is gonna just blow up in the Detroit Lions offense and that offensive scheme. And it, the Lions had Swift and Jamal Williams last year. Swift was a second round pick by the Lions. Like as I said, Jamal Williams had a very good year, and Dan Campbell and that regime was like, yeah, we're all set with Swift, we're all set with Jamal Williams. We're gonna go get our guys. They drafted Jahmyr Gibbs, obviously very high in the NFL draft, and they went out and paid David Montgomery a fairly sizable free agent contract compared to free agent running backs over the last 4 or 5 years. And the Detroit Lions said, hey, these are our guys. So last year, Swift, Craig Reynolds, and Justin Jackson combined for 164 attempts. The Lions ran the ball, 480 attempts rushing. So 164 of those attempts equates to 34% of the team's rushing totals. And I think Jahmyr Gibbs is probably going to be around there, like the 34%, maybe 40% of the rushes. But I think Jahmyr Gibbs is going to be obviously utilized heavily in the receiving game, which is where he's going to obviously create his opportunities in fantasy football. But in my opinion, David Montgomery is a much better running back than Jamal Williams. The numbers say that, and the Lions went out and got him to replace Jamal Williams. And I just think David Montgomery's gonna have a ton of touchdowns and a ton of opportunity running the ball. And I do think he's gonna carve a small role in the receiving game, but much more than Jamal Williams did. David Montgomery isn't just a 2 down grinder. He's a 3 down. He has a skill set for 3 down back. And I do think he can still carve out a small target share, which Jamal Williams could not. So having Dave Montgomery, a full, complete running back, replace a guy that scored whatever 17 touchdowns last year in an emerging ascending offense is a no brainer at ECR 25.
Yeah, it's a really good spot to draft David Montgomery. I like him a lot, especially I like him as a depth piece, certainly, but I also like him as a target for a team that went with an RB0 approach in a redraft league where if you stock the fridge on whatever it is, receivers, tight end, quarterback, maybe all of the above before you get to round 6 or 7, where you're starting to think about your starting running backs where he's not a sexy name, but he's someone that can provide you RB2 numbers if you need him. Maybe even low end RB1 upside, like for the reasons that you mentioned. That he's a target definitely to keep in mind if you're looking for a starter, or definitely looking to fill in a flex spot a little bit later down your board. So I think he fits a little bit of whatever you're looking for. I'm high on Montgomery this season as well. I'm hoping that ADP stays a little bit depressed on him. But we'll see how that goes as the draft season unfolds. The player I'm going to go with here is J.K. Dobbins, ECR RB19, ADP of 53. He was an absolute mess last season. 2022 was just a lost cause for most of the campaign for Dobbins, recovering from a complex knee injury that he actually suffered before the 2021 season even got going. So it took him a full year to get healthy and get back on the field. He missed 8 games in total, all of which came during the first 13 weeks of the season. But when he did finally get back out there, he was actually really productive. He exceeded 93 rushing yards in 3 of his final 4 regular season games, while not even ever once playing more than 50% of the snaps at any point in 2022. So if you count those games as well as the team's lone playoff game, he ran for 4.7 yards per carry or better in each game of that 5-game sample size to close out the year. So he had a strong finish to the season. He enters 2023 completely healthy for the first time in 2 years. It's also a contract year for him too, so he does know that if he wants any prayer of having at least a decent chunk of change come his way in 2024, he knows he needs to perform this year. And all of this comes at a time where the Ravens' offensive philosophy is changing. Just because we have this idea of Dobbins is operating as part of an ugly committee and like an archaic Greg Roman led offense doesn't mean that's the case at all anymore. They're ushering in a more modern approach under Todd Monken, who is gonna throw the ball more than Roman did. And while less volume on the ground might not be ideal for running backs, the offense should be more effective and move down the field a little bit more efficiently, which could create additional scoring opportunities for Dobbins and Lamar Jackson as well on the ground. And speaking of Monken, we know he did big things at Georgia in the last handful of seasons, but let's look at his last 2 years as an offensive coordinator at the NFL level. In Tampa Bay, Peyton Barber touched the ball 253 times. That was good for 12th in the league that season. And his top backup that season had only the running back only had 71 total touches on that campaign. Like Nick Chubb in 2019, when Monken moved over to Cleveland, like he touched the ball a ton too, 335 times. That was good for 4th in the league that season. And the top backup on that team only had 80 touches that year. So, Nick Chubb's a hell of a running back, as we know, but Peyton Barber was kind of a jag, as you and I remember our discussions years ago talking about how Peyton Barber doesn't deserve that job and how Rojo should be taken over. But, Monken has no problem giving the ball to his top running back. So as decent as Gus Edwards has been in the past, I think Dobbins is the man in this backfield. And if Monken does go back to favoring one guy, I think Dobbins is going to be a big benefactor of that, especially with him not being under contract next season. The team just kind of has every reason in the world to run the guy into the ground this year. If we know teams don't like to pay running back, so they may as well get their money back with them, make their money on him this year. And we're talking about the 5th round here, so you're not using your 2nd or 3rd round pick on him and or anything like that. Like you're likely getting him as your 2nd or 3rd running back off the board. So you can take a little bit more risk here if you're worried about the injury situation. I just think he's in store for a big 2023 season, and we'll see how it pans out. But tell me where you're at on Dobbins.
Yeah, I'm very high on Dobbins as well. You mentioned Peyton Barber. He pissed me off a lot back in the day because all I wanted was Rojo to get his opportunity, and I'm still waiting for that. But
Waiting
yeah,
and waiting and waiting.
Yeah, so yeah, the Rojo, that's a story for another day. But no, I agree with everything you said with J.K. Dobbins. And coming off an injury, he was surprisingly very efficient last year. Just looking at Player Profiler, he was top 3 in juke rate and breakaway run rate, and his true yards per carry of 5.2, which excludes carries over 10 yards. He was number 4 of out of the running back position. So the analytics behind J.K. Dobbins last year told us that he was a very efficient runner, and he was the guy that we thought he was going to be coming out of Ohio State. So I'm very excited to see a healthy J.K. Dobbins this year in what we think is going to be an improved Ravens offense. Even if his opportunity share goes down in terms of overall carries, I think the increased efficiency of the offense is going to pay dividends in the touchdown department. So I am excited for J.K. Dobbins this year.
Yeah, we'll see how it turns out for Dobbins. It's been an up and down start to his career from a health standpoint, from a production standpoint as well. So we're fingers crossed that he has a good season this year. But tell me who you're high on do you think who's going to have a good year this year at the tight end position?
Yeah, the tight end position, I think it's if you don't get those top 3, 4, 5 guys, you might as well just punt position. I remember one year I punted tight end. I drafted George Kittle in the double-digit rounds, and he was tight end 1 that year. And I ended up winning the league because it's just such a positional advantage if you get those top guys. But I think a guy that has a chance to smash his ECR, which is 22, is Trey McBride. I think he is he had with Ertz going down in November with a ACL and MCL. He should be the starter in week 1. I don't think Ertz is going to be ready to go. Trey McBride was selected 55th overall by the Arizona Cardinals last draft, and he was the first tight end drafted in his draft class. So decent capital, and he has a decent NFL profile. At 6'4", 245 pounds, he's essentially the oak tree in a field of Charlie Brown Christmas trees, looking at that starting receiving core with Rondell Moore, 5'7", Greg Dortch, 5'7", Marquise Brown, 5'9". So I think he is going to have a lot of opportunity at the goal line. He had a 62.5% contested catch rate, which was good for number 3 amongst tight ends. I think he's going to be heavily targeted around the goal line. And as I said, he's the only big bodied option, unless their third round selection there can take off as a rookie. But rookie receivers, I mean, they're so hit or miss. So I think McBride's going to have the full command at the goal line, and he should take on the tight end 1 role and hopefully keep it this year, depending how Zach Ertz returns. But Zach Ertz is 30. Is going to be 33 this year, so I'm not banking he's going to have a quick recovery, but I guess you never know. But I think Trey McBride at ECR 22 has a chance to smash that and has a good opportunity, even though it's a bad offense, to rack up a lot of targets.
I've been pretty high on Trey McBride since from 2 years ago, or two draft cycles ago. He was the consensus top dynasty tight end in 2022, and we kind of knew it might take a little bit of time, especially in Arizona. I'm a little skeptical if he can finish as a top 12 tight end, just kind of overall, based on overall scoring or points per game this year. But I will say, if the team does get Zach Ertz on the field, those guys will probably split reps to start the year. Maybe they use this year for Ertz as kind of like an audition to trade him away mid-season. So I can see McBride being someone that kind of takes off towards the second half of the season, someone who's giving you tight end 1 numbers down the stretch, the second half of the season, and then going forward, he's a guy that you're looking to draft in fantasy because he's just going to be one of those guys who has the opportunity to help win you weeks every single week, even if it's not at the elite level. Someone who's kind of in the back end of the top 12 tight end range. I think that's in the realm of possibilities for him, more so towards the second half of the season than early on. But as a prospect, I really like the guy. And the second round draft capital probably means he'll get a chance, even though it was a different regime that brought him in. They just haven't done a ton at tight end to add to this room. So it tells me that they at least want to get a look at McBride, and he'll have opportunities to carve out a role for himself in his offense as early as this season. Now let's go to what our last player we're going to touch on tonight, another tight end. It's Hayden Hurst, ECR 21, ADP 185. And at a quick glance, Hurst, you're like, okay, yeah, he's the dude with the long hair who doesn't do much. I know this story. But the one time that he actually had target opportunity in his career, he finished as a back end tight end 1 in 2020 with the Atlanta Falcons. And now he's on his 4th team in 4 years, but the Panthers did make a sizable commitment to Hayden Hurst. They gave him a 3-year contract that carried a higher AAV and more guaranteed money than any tight end in the league this offseason. So he's joining the Panthers at a time where they just drafted what they hope is going to be their franchise quarterback in Bryce Young, and that guy's going to need security blankets, especially early on in his career. So looking around the rest of the Panthers depth chart, there's definitely not much at tight end. We're talking about the likes of like Ian Thomas, who us as dynasty managers have been waiting to be a thing for like 5 years, and it's just not going to happen. So they make the commitment to Hurst. He's going to have a stranglehold on tight end looks. But even looking at the wide receiver position, like they brought in Adam Thielen, who was kind of their big free agent signing, but he's 33 years old and he's coming off a down year. He was PFF's 68th ranked wide receiver last year, and it's pretty obvious to everyone that his best days are in the rearview mirror at this point. Outside of Thielen, we're looking at DJ Shark, who I know is another guy who you can kind of toss into your Rojo category, where he had one decent year, then you're like wanting more and more. But he's kind of your classic case of a flash in the pan that people hold out hope for 7 more years just to be disappointed. And
Talking about me?
Oh yeah, who? Who? DJ Shark, Ethan Weaver? No, never. But and then we're gonna go to Jonathan Mingo. Like you just mentioned, some of the rookie receivers in Arizona, like kind of the same category here. Yeah, he got day 2 draft capital, early day 2 draft capital, which was great, but he's really raw. He barely produced at Ole Miss. It took him 4 years to do anything of note down there, and now he's in the NFL. So I could see him panning out in the long run, but I think he's more of a project that people want him to be. So that just kind of leaves Hurst, who at age 30 is in the prime of his career for a tight end. That's not ancient. It's not like we're talking about a running back here, and there's not really a ton of people to draw a ton of looks away from him. I just think that he's in a position where he can give you that, tight end 8 to 12 numbers and you're drafting him in a range here where it's 185. We're talking about like that's at the end of your drafts, like it's basically free to get your hands on him. So if you punted the position, you can pair him up with a guy like a Trey McBride. You can pair him up with someone a little bit later, further down your board, maybe Juwan Johnson type, someone like that, who can give you viability. You know, the bar isn't all that high for a tight end to finish as a back end tight end one. If you average 7.5 fantasy points per game in half PPR last season, you finish as a top 12 tight end. So it doesn't take a whole hell of a lot to be very viable on the fantasy landscape. So those are my thoughts on Hayden Hurst. I guess we'll wrap it up with your any points you have on that.
Yeah, I think Hurst is a good call. Last year, playing for Cincinnati, he had 70 targets, which was good for number 12 amongst tight ends, which is pretty good in that room there, on that receiving core, I should say, in Cincinnati with Boyd, Chase, and Higgins. So for him to command essentially a 15% target share in Cincinnati was I think decently impressive, considering obviously the names I just mentioned. So going over to Carolina, his target share is definitely going to increase, and I think his targets of 70 and his receptions of 54 is only going to go up. So if he was able to have a decent little season in Cincinnati, I think a team like Carolina, who went out and paid him to be their main tight end and a much more focused target option in their offense, I think Hayden Hurst has a chance to return great value this year.
Yeah, we'll see what the future holds for Hurst. You know, you don't really think of guys that bounce around the league as, you know, really guys that are kind of like lock, stock, and barrel producers for you. Certainly on the redraft landscape. But I'm kind of hoping here that, you know, if you have Hayden Hurst, maybe in Dynasty or somewhere else, that his career arc kind of looks a little bit like Jared Cook's from years past, where he was kind of a guy who had a lot of billing coming in that didn't really do much for a while. He had flirted with the tight end one range a little bit. Then later on, as he progressed in his career, he got into his 30s. He actually gave his 2 top 7 finishes at the tight end position. So it can sometimes take a longer than we want for a tight end to be fully viable. So Hurst, like I said, is still in the prime of his career at age 30. And I'm kind of hopeful that this is the year that he puts it all together. You know, I don't think he's going to be a top 5 guy, but I think he's someone who could be sneaky viable and someone that could work really well in tandem with someone else in that draft range that he's going, where you can kind of stream the position and kind of get away with good matchups. And Hurst can definitely fit the mold for that. But that was fun to buzz through these names and just kind of talk about those level jumpers, those guys that outperform their ADP and help win you leagues. And I'm sure we'll do more of these exercises. We'll be referencing Fantasy Pros, the ECR, as well as the average draft position, a lot more going forward as we really get full blown into redraft season. But I did want to plug our show coming up here. We got a confirmation that in the near future we're going to have Sam Berman of Underdog Fantasy. He's going to be coming back on the podcast with us and kind of talking up Underdog, talking up Best Ball, which is a really fun format for those who have never tried it. It's growing pretty quickly. You can play it for, you know, you redraft, you play it in Dynasty. They have those formats out there too. But we'll dive more into all that with Sam here. He was one of the original employees at Underdog too, so it's really cool that he's going to take the time out to come back and join the program. We'll have that for you hopefully in the next handful of weeks. But we'll look forward to that. And until next time, folks, peace.